Welcome back to the Trusty Ape podcast. You can call me Ape. This is the long-awaited Dr. Phil gender debate in autistic detail. Review of the review by me on Snake Was Right. You can find link to that video in its original entirety below. I will not be reviewing the whole video. It's over, nearly 3.5 hours long. And I don't generally think that Snake and I have many disagreements, although I think there are a few that are important and will be addressed here. I have a little list of points to go over, so I didn't think it was necessary to play the whole intro for the video. And for a few reasons I'll address here. Many of the points Snake elaborates in the intro are specifically towards these interlocutors, both the non-binary people or what have you. Both the interlocutors of this debate on the show are fundamentalists and just a bit, one might say, on the extreme or absurd end of a spectrum. And so I think that's acknowledged between the two of us. And so I do feel like there are several points here to address that Snake made that could be maybe misconstrued, or maybe I'm misunderstanding or what have you. So we'll go through those and see whether or not Snake wants to have a conversation about that in the future with me. So that being said, we'll get right into the video. And so I skipped to about 1 minute and 47 seconds. We'll let this play for a minute, and then I'm actually going to skip into the intro on the Dr. Phil show presentation. Right, this is from Dr. Phil, and so my forewarning is not to take very seriously the views expressed by anyone on the Dr. Phil show, including Dr. Phil himself. Right, I think that would be a bad idea. Daytime talk show is not the best source for credible information, by and large. So we'll play that, and there will be a couple points I think we'll address essentially within the first 15 minutes that Snake will make in response to these folks in their presentation, and we'll address those points as they come. And after that, I will be kind of skipping broadly through the chapters of the video, which you can find listed in the original video. I will try to put some timestamps on my particular points here as well, just to make everything a little bit easier to navigate in the replay. Obviously, this is pre-recorded on StreamYard, so you will be seeing this sometime tomorrow. I plan on scheduling to release it once I get a chance to review and edit it. And as I said, in the interest of time, makes a number of very valid and rational points. I tend to agree with Snake Was Right on a lot of things. I think I first became familiar with them on a Monday debate, and from there went to subscribe to the channel. And this video coincidentally popped the day after I had made my coming out video. So obviously this isn't addressed to me, but it seemed like something I should kind of personally address in my current situation. So, and it is timely in another sense that much of the reasoning I'm going to employ here is kind of indicative of the argument I'm making generally about philosophy, which is going to be somewhat related, and we'll see how that kind of ties in as we go along. And I will be making a bit more detailed video soon regarding what I'm doing with that and how it's coming. Without further ado, we'll begin the video.
What I'm arguing against here will be the fundamentalist attitude some of these activists have that ironically erases trans people, lesbians also in particular, and gender nonconforming cis people. So trans people are on the binary. They transition from one gender to the other. Non-binary basically spits in the face of that, says that if you're a manly girl or a girly man, that's a new gender. And asking someone's pronouns is more likely to actually just let them know that you clocked them as not cis. So this is really deeply problematic. I don't, in principle, believe in trigger warnings, but warning, I'm going to be using some real blunt, basic layman's terms. I'm not going to be tiptoeing around things. I'm going to say offensive things. If you don't want to hear that, you don't have to watch. But there we go. I could keep giving a lengthy intro, but let's just jump in, and you'll.
As I said, I am going to here skip to about 5 minutes if I can navigate it. 5:06, close enough.
But I'm totally open to learning, and I want this to be a safe place to talk about and learn. But not every person is on board with this new movement. Half of Americans say they feel very or somewhat comfortable using gender-neutral pronouns, while 48% say they feel very or somewhat uncomfortable using them. Now, this growing debate regarding the use of pronouns has this country pretty divided. Take a look.
Controversy tonight over a new policy on how gender identity is addressed.
You may notice
Plays will non-binary assign
nouns.
individual.
Your kids can be.
And I'm Ethan.
Madison and Ethan have a lot to say.
I'm Madison.
And I'm Ethan.
And Ethan have a lot to say. Gender pronouns are a big topic of conversation that cannot.
It looks like there may be a bit of a problem with my connection as well, but I know at this point Snake was kind of fiddling with the video on their end, so now we should be getting into the actual argument here.
Not and should not be ignored. And my first guest, Addison and Ethan, have a lot to
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess it's Ethan. I said Vincent.
say.
I'm Addison.
And I'm Ethan.
We've been together for about
5 years.
And
Been
married.
married for 3 years.
I use they them pronouns. Being non-binary just means that I just don't identify with the gender I was assigned at birth, and I don't identify exclusively with being a man or a woman. I'm something in between.
So, right off the bat, you are not assigned a gender at birth, other than nature. You were born with a particular set of genitalia, and the doctor noted this on your birth certificate. Period. End of story. We don't even do genetic testing on babies. They're identified by a third person, not assigned. So that's really the end of the story. And they're identified by their sex characteristics, their phenotype, not their genotype. Yes, it can get a little more complicated, but we'll get to that. And I never really know what it means to identify as both male and female?
Okay, so right there's a good point. I do think it's absurd to identify with both male and female. Masculinity versus femininity is the topic that's going to be brought up. It's an important one, and will come up throughout this. Let's talk about identifying with versus identifying as, right? Because you can say that you identify with the feminine traits or characteristics, not identifying as a female, right? So what's going to be brought up here repeatedly is kind of this insinuation that, as has already been stated, that a non-binary is being used in a sense as a third gender, and I think we can kind of take that off the table. Using they and them, right? It's not insinuating any third gender. It's insinuating, or rather, it's insisting upon a non or a gender neutral pronoun or word of reference, right, to somebody whose gender preference or identity is not known to you. So there's nothing abnormal about using they or them, right, in the context if you truly do not know the gender of the person. As I'll bring up later, and the significance of having a gender neutral name. There are gender neutral names. If you hear the name of a person, you're speaking about them in the sense that where they are not present and you do not know them, right? And you cannot assume or guess by their name what gender they are. You would not proceed to call them by a gendered pronoun. You would call them they, right? So this is actually the way we use language. So I think that's the first important point. And so whether you identify with another gender, or if you identify as another gender, or identifying somewhere in between, right? And we'll talk more about that. What is nonconformist and what is fluidity, right?
Everyone can identify with people from all walks of life, and there's going to be a bit of, I'm going to try and avoid equivocation of the term identify, because you can identify something as a third person, you can identify something as a thing, or you can identify with a third person things, as in you.
Right, but again, you're missing the point that if you identify with something, maybe identifying as something, right? That might be a process, but again, you are equivocating by saying that what other people identify you as should be the same as what you identify as, which would fundamentally be denying many trans people who you're going to be protecting. You'd be not denying them their transness, like, because if they do not meet that that third party identity criteria, then they are not sufficiently trans, and they do not deserve to be addressed by their preferred pronoun according to your logic here.
You empathize or sympathize with them, or see yourself in them, but I don't know what it means to identify as both male and female. I actually don't. I understand what it is to identify with the masculine and the feminine, so we'll explore that. Again, anyone can identify with people from all walks of life. I can identify with people who are not in my racial group. Does that mean I am part of a different racial group? No, it just means I'm not a racist and I see people as people.
Right, and you fail to account for the fact that somebody who might appear in a certain racial group might also be of a mixed ethnic background, right? So presuming their racial group is, again, something that we've deemed as a society to be inappropriate by and large, right? It's a difference between how you identify an individual when you're calling an ambulance or calling the police, as opposed to in a social interaction and speaking to somebody in common terms.
Let's not delve into race arguments today either. So identification in the sense of this, what we're talking about here is not, I'm going to try and make a differentiation between when other people are talking about you, identifying traits in you, and identifying with you, identifying with other things, other people, animals, etc. But let's talk about what it means to identify as gender non-conforming. What the non-binaries are actually saying is, or insinuating, is that because they aren't a stereotypical whatever gender they are, that means they actually have a different gender, a new gender, a third gender, or third plus gender. So this actually really is wrong, because
No, I think you're wrong in making that assessment. It's not a third plus gender. It is not a new gender. And by definition, being gender nonconforming means that you do not conform to either gender binary role, right? Which is literally what non-binary means, right? Being gender fluid is being somewhere on that spectrum in between that binary, where you are actually able to transverse that binary. Now, as far as where non-binary is used in the context it's used, right? And this will be mentioned later on in the video, right? If somebody is expecting to be referred to by a different pronoun and appear in a different way on a day-to-day basis, on their whims, maybe even multiple times throughout the day, right? That would be an absurdity, right? And we can talk about anything that could be reasonable on its face being taken to its logical absurdity, its logical extreme, and all of a sudden it becomes unreasonable, right? But that could be true of anything. And at this point in time, what that's true of is cis and hetero people, right? They are the ones who are being generally unreasonable. Now, how that might relate to Addison here and Ethan, right? Not Vincent, I think. That's important too, because if I'm going to call dead name a trans person and call them by their given name, what is that, right? That is one of the most disrespectful things you can do to a person. And part of our society, our common ground, right, is respecting another person. Right? I wouldn't call a Christian a Muslim. I wouldn't call Frank, Farah or whatever. That is a matter of just respect. And yes, you can go around disrespecting people all you want. So non-binary is not a third gender, at least not as far as what it actually means or how I see it as adopted by most, right? Non-binary tends to adopt people who are somewhere in the gender non-conforming or gender fluid realm, right? But it's not adequately described by either one. Also because non-conforming and gender fluid do not come equipped with a pronoun, right? So, whereas the extreme of that is, well, I want you to call me he today and she for the rest of the week, right? That's the absurdity. Accepting non-binary and just calling me them, right, is a sign of respect, of showing that this person may have some non-conforming or fluid gender traits that we are acknowledging and respecting, and as far as that is relevant to our relationship. And in some ways, it's kind of like respecting somebody claiming they are an atheist, right? Atheist doesn't mean I am anti-theist. It doesn't mean I'm claiming that there is no God. It means that I have not accepted the theistic claims, right? I am taking an agnostic and neutral position on this claim. And furthermore, for me personally, as a social nonconformist, and me believing that essentially that genders in the broad sense are, in fact, a social construct, right? For me to call myself a gender nonconformist, for me to be a social nonconforming gender nonconformist, right? It's redundant. It's redundant in language, it's unnecessary, and it's much easier for me to identify and concisely identify myself in these terms. Okay.
There's nothing wrong with being a feminine man or a masculine woman. And that should not create a new gender category. Okay. And the idea that this should is toxic. It's actually sad. It's sadly destroying a lot of lesbian people, because now butch lesbians think that they can't be a woman if they're masculine. It must mean they're a man or not either one or both. And
So I think you're off base there as well, and I think that's a big problem that we will get into in defining an androgynous person, whether they appear androgynous by their presentation by choice, or whether they appear androgynous as a matter of their actual inherent characteristics, right? So having this this butch lesbian stereotype is actually a part of the problem, right? Because now you have an assumption where if a lesbian woman, presumably, right, if a cis woman, right, dresses in jeans and plaid shirt and wears short hair, all of a sudden you might assume butch, you might assume lesbian, right? And there's no actual reason to. So that's a bad assumption, right? This is gay and lesbian are sexual preferences. They are not a part of the gender spectrum in reality, right? Like as in of themselves, they are not by definition. But to assume that you're gay, right, presumes a gender, right? You can't, if you're a gay woman, you're a lesbian, and vice versa, right? So to say that you're a gay person, it presumes that you're a man. To say that you're a lesbian presumes that you're a woman. But to say that you're a butch is really a stereotype placed upon lesbian women that is not entirely accurate. It's not even, I think largely or mostly accurate. There are butch lesbians, but that doesn't mean that all people who are stereotyped in that category are butch. And in fact, some of those people are non-binary, right? But not all of those people. So you want to kind of make these categories specific enough, but still open to some wiggle room, because otherwise you end up with that other option, those actual third gender pronouns, and calling people zer and I don't know all of them X, however, because this wasn't good enough, right? Because non-conformity and non and fluidity as non-binary was not an acceptable middle ground for some reason, right? So, and on a third note, so what would you say of a gay man who is also a trans man, right? Are they in fact a heterosexual woman who's now inhabited a man's body, right? It doesn't follow. So, if you're a trans man, then you're a man, and you still are attracted to men, then you are a gay man, right? Now, in my particular case, that's a much different story. So me being bisexual or pansexual, but claiming a non-binary gender stereotype puts me, for my personal reasons, in a different category, right? Non-binary can also be expressive of your gender or your sexual expression, and we'll talk a little bit about the definitions there, the difference between sex, gender, and sexuality more as we go. But let's continue.
I have no problem with trans men, but there is a huge disparity between trans men and trans women. There, all of a sudden, trans men are like hundreds, thousands of percentage points more prevalent than trans women, and in a specific young female demographic population. So there seems to be some kind of social contagion surrounding the narrative of gender going on. And ironically, the gender activists are upholding strictest possible gender roles and expressions like Matt Walsh would want us to have, because if they feel like they're not a stereotypically masculine man, they must not be a man, etc. And this is really toxic. The thought process is you're a guy with a beard, but you want to have long hair and wear makeup. Therefore, you're not a man. You're a new category. This is it actually confuses people a lot more instead of communicates ideas properly, instead of just allowing men to have a space where they feel comfortable being pretty and feminine. You have to instead create this new category of gender. And to be fair, this is why they'll say you get to decide for yourself what your gender expression means to you. But they don't really mean this, because that would mean that, okay, we can have feminine men and they're still men. And this just ends up meaning that there's no meaning to any of the words being used.
No, there absolutely is a meaning, right? You just said it. We can have feminine men, right? That's not what makes a person a trans person. That's also not what makes a person non-binary, right? And the fact that maybe some people are confused, right, about these distinctions is why we need to rethink the way we are using language commonly and how we are educating people, which is going to be essentially the crux of my argument towards the end here, right? It's all a matter of educating people properly, not having these knee-jerk reactions, right, to minor transgressions, right, that actually you should see as, a bit laughable. If you're taking it that seriously, right? Why can't we have feminine males? Well, clearly we do. We have many feminine males, right? But again, the distinctions and the reason we have the language, right? What is a non-binary person, right? Well, now you have a feminine individual, and whether they choose to identify as male or female, and whether that's something that is important to you or anybody else around you within a social context and an interaction, right, is going to be indicative of whether or not you engage with this person, right? It actually has to do more with your perception of them, which is, again, this misconception that your perception of somebody, right, your description of somebody should be the assumption you should have when you're interacting with them, right? It's very common for two apparently cis hetero males to ask about wife and kids at work, right? And if one of these men happens to be a gay man, that may be a very awkward conversation for them. An awkward way to start a conversation, and then the hetero guy has to walk it back, right? Why did you ever make that assumption? Because you're programmed to. It's not a good assumption.
We'll get to that. So I digress. Back to the show.
Queen outside of that binary.
My pronouns are he or they. 5 years.
I'm married
for 3 years.
I use they them pronouns. Being non-binary just means that I just don't identify with the gender I was assigned at birth, and I don't identify.
All about feelings. It's all about emotions. And I'm not hating on this person. Clearly following the gender binary social construct of masculinity and femininity.
I do apologize. I think we're where I want to know.
Too. Literally, this person identifies himself as both man and not man. It doesn't get more incoherent than that. And it's all about feelings. It's all about emotions. And I'm not hating on this person. All love to them. It's just, I'm removing, I'm trying to, I'm not trying to remove compassion, but I'm trying to remove feeling and emotion from arguments, okay? I'm trying to keep them separate.
Being non-binary means having the sense of freedom to explore.
And I do very much respect that about your argument, although I feel you may have some bias here. Speaking directly to Snake, or anybody who may be adopting this argument, especially in response, again, to the people's being presented, right? This seems to be a very unusual case. And I'm not sure how old this feature is. So again, consider the source. Dr. Phil is entertainment, is not education. And now we will fast forward here. Use the timestamps in Snake's video. Yes.
You were watching the tape piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a hot topic.
Yes.
That's a good thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why is it a good thing?
I guess because it creates dialogue and it invites conversation to learn about other people.
Yeah.
No, it does not. Again, this is said in a nice way that can't really be argued with on its face, but dialogue and conversation to them really means is that they want you to come to them for the answers and they get to lecture you. They do not want to have an actual conversation about whether they're correct or not. They don't want to explore the merits of ideas. They don't want to explore other ideas. They just want to put their ideas out there and have you accept them. They don't even want to entertain the idea that they need to be corrected. They just want to correct you. They want to teach you about how to treat them, and they don't want to hear anything else. And I have proof of this. After this dialogue and conversation with Matt Walsh occurred, these two posted that they were having nightmares and depression and anxiety. They were not prepared for a discussion. They were prepared for lecturing us and us accepting with no pushback. They're liars. End of story.
So I do think here there may be a bit more assumption behind the intentions of these individuals. Now, you know, a bit of extra on Snake's part, right? So can we assume bad faith, right? Look again, consider the source. I don't think, you know, the Dr. Phil show, they're not interested in actual education or getting a good steelman version of these arguments, right? As he said, it is a hot topic, right? They want hot takes. Putting somebody like Matt Walsh against Addison and Ethan in this situation, and it's not framed as a debate, right? In any way that I can tell, the show is a hot conversation, right? But it is not framed as debate, as Snake has put it. Although it does devolve essentially into that, as most of these Dr. Phil debacles do, right? They're not meant to represent the legitimate field. They're meant to be entertaining, and that's the problem with a lot of daytime television, a lot of TV doctors, right? Dr. Oz, all these people are in some sense charlatans of science. Putting doctor before your name doesn't legitimize your platform. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who will subscribe to to this type of stuff and take it to be a lot more significant than it is. I saw it on Dr. Phil, might as well be I saw it on Jerry Springer. But if you put doctor before Jerry's name, we might have a whole different interpretation by many simpletons who are subscribing to this stuff. So I think we can safely assume that these are, presumably weak targets, right? They're not representative of most of the non-binary community. This adoption of a label versus a category, right? A label generally is something that is put on you by others, right? When you categorize yourself and your preferences, as with your sexual preference in relation to your gender preference, right? If you are a gay trans man, you are a gay man, right? But to simply say that you are a gay man negates the trans, right? And there are maybe, I presume, cis gay men who would not be okay with that, right? So some people maintain this attitude where there is some differentiation there, right? But there's a reason that we put LGB, right? Lesbians, gays, bisexuals, in with trans, in with queer, in with intersex, right? All these things are categorized in a certain way that says that it is all outside of the normative, right? Non-binary just being among those. And being merely androgynous, once again, does not make you non-binary. So, and being an androgynous woman who dresses, in a masculine way doesn't necessarily make one a lesbian or a butch. So we have the categories for a reason, is to avoid external labels, external expectations being put upon us based on those personal decisions regarding sexuality and appearance and presentation. All right. Hopefully, fuck up the timestamps here. We got it 22. Let's try here. 22, 20, 214.
Including you, Addison. You just assumed Dr. Phil's pronouns. Pronouns are not for you. Gendered pronouns are inherently third person for people to describe people other than themselves. You don't use your own pronouns.
Right. We don't use first person pronouns. We use the singular, right? But again, if other people are describing you, as far as what does that person look like, there's a difference. If I know that person maybe looks androgynous, but identifies as a trans man, right? I will not be presuming their genitals. If I say, well, that person looks androgynous, but I think they might be a biological woman, right? What am I doing? I'm again presuming their preference according to my description, and I'm just presuming thereby their genitals by making that assumption. Wrong assumption, right? I do not get to actually define who you are. I can describe you in some vague sense, but if I'm to meet you and address you, assuming that and not actually knowing that, then I'm acting in error.
For doing so.
Pronouns. We all may have a certain gender pronoun too, but I think it's important for people to understand that for trans and non-binary people, we often change our pronouns to reflect who we are when we come out and be who we are.
That's not what pronouns are for. They're not for reflecting who you are. They're for reflecting what you are, more specifically for other people to describe what you are. What you want is the fact that it makes you special and different, and it signifies this.
How do you explain the difference?
So yeah, I just have to just disagree as a blanket statement. Who are you telling us? Are you telling me, right? Who are you to tell others what pronouns are for, right? If again a trans woman wants to come out as a trans woman, whatever, regardless of whether they're in the process of gender confirmation or not, right? And they want to come out to those around them and express that they are in fact a woman, right? And they don't look, according to those around them, sufficiently like a woman, then by your logic, these people have the right to continue to use whatever pronouns they want, right? They can continue to call this woman a man until such time, maybe, that they sufficiently appear to be female to those people, right? Is that the way we should interact with each other? Again, if I'm describing some stranger to a police officer or a paramedic, maybe I'll just use the vaguest general description. But if I know a person and I could say, hey, yes, this person, still appears, somewhat masculine, but they are a trans woman. They are in the process of their gender confirmation treatments and all of that, right? That might even be, secondary, very useful information to those people, right? So the fact that you know this, right, but you wouldn't actively call this person by their preferred pronoun to their face, again, and I'll just say it now, I think it's going to come up fairly soon as we skip through this video, and I'm going on at length a little earlier than I planned, but I'm repeating a lot of the same points here. And so when we talk about when a trans person, right, changes their name, when they announce that they are a trans woman and they change their name from, hypothetically Bob to Susanna, right? And now you continue to call that person Bob. What are you doing? We call that dead naming somebody. Why? Because it was the masculine, biologically given name, right, along with the masculine biological sex that person was assigned at birth, which is non-reflective of their trans identity, right? So take for the other example, somebody with a name like Chris, right? Chris could be Christopher. It could be Christine. They could be Kristen. They could be Christoph or Christian, and take your pick, right? But if you only know this person's name is Chris and you've never met them before, are you going to call them he? You're going to call them she? Are you going to call Chris they or them when you're conversing about this person, having no prior knowledge about their gender appearance, right? And then once you know and confirm, oh yes, Chris is Christine, a woman, a cis woman who prefers to be known as a woman, right? Okay, well then you know. Well, what if Chris was Christine, a cis woman who was now transitioning to be just Chris, a trans man? Well, now you have another category in which the binary plays into it, right? But a non-binary adoption, right, for that descriptive word, whether you want to call it a pronoun or whatever, right? That description of that person must remain sufficiently neutral until you are introduced that information. Make sense? Okay. 35. Let's skip ahead pretty significantly now. See how we go. Ooh. Professional.
Used to broadly denote a range of identities that do not correspond to established ideas of male and female. So, first of all, identity. What is an identity? It's being used to mean how someone sees themselves, but what it really is what a thing is. Your identity is what you are, period. It's just that the woke gender fundamentalists think that what you think you are is what you are, in some metaphysical, metaphorical sense, that's true. That's for fiction. That's for spirituality. That's not for what we're talking about here. That's like, okay, I have dragon energy, right? Or you have big dick energy. Maybe you don't have a big dick, but you act like you do. That's not what we're talking about. So the reason trans people want to transition, there is a reason, right? Because there is an essence to what they're transitioning to. There's a reason why physical transition is a thing and not just mental. There's a reason why trans people don't just switch it in their brain. They want to have physical changes because gender is physical. So, bringing it back a bit, according to the dictionary, gender means male or female, or not male or female. So, gender means nothing. Imagine if I told you that the word dog meant any breed of domesticated canine descended member of carnivora or any non-canine entity. It would mean everything and nothing. This is where we are with the word gender. Okay? Either of the two sexes or a range of identities that do not correspond with the ideas of the two sexes. Okay? Great. So, all right. I really digressed with that one.
It's really, about a
Right. Well, I guess we'll just address all of this there, right? Is that, trans identity is trans identity, right? A trans woman is not claiming to be a woman, right? Because of the biological construction, right? That's not to say, assuming, as is done here by Snake many times, that one must have a gender confirmation in order to be legitimately trans, I think, is something that's still not entirely known. It's contested, it's up for debate, right? But again, regardless of whether or not they are in that process or what stage of that process they are in, once a person identifies they are a trans person, right, it is appropriate socially for people to respect that identity, right? The idea that gender just ceases to mean anything is ridiculous. No, nonconformance to gender roles, gender stereotypes, is a secondary issue, right? And whether you do conform to gender stereotypes in particular aspect is yet another issue. So the pronoun that does not mean what the biological sex means, right? Otherwise, gay man would it, as it is a redundancy, but to be a gay trans man, right, is not, right? You actually have two different things going on there, or three different things going on there. And what is descriptive, again, adequately descriptive, and based upon the needs or the desire of that individual to be revealed, right, in an external capacity to others, is important in social cohesion. And so again, it's important. If you don't know Chris's preferred or known sex or gender identity, right? If you don't know, call Chris by Chris's name or call Chris by their name. They, them. Call Chris by a neutral pronoun or description, right? Not that hard. And if we're doing this for everybody, it normalizes getting to know a person before making assumptions about them and functioning in society based by those norms rather than gender stereotypical norms as they have been, which are exclusionary. I may have to break this into a two-parter. We'll do a little bit more here. I have another timestamp, and I think we may have to do a part 2, and I will wrap for tonight after this point and come back to it, because there's always more time. This has been the Trusty Ape Podcast. If you didn't know, I am the Ape, also known as Chaos. I am a non-binary queer person assigned male at birth. There you go. All right, here we go.
Pronouns. I don't give them, and I won't be doing it anytime soon. You get to make that decision. I do this on principle, because they're not mine. They're for you to describe me. Okay? I'm not going to say these people are full-on malignant narcissists, but they've got a little bit of narcissism, okay?
Right. So Snake just described how Snake, do not prefer to give pronouns, right? Presumably, then I will call Snake by their name, Snake, or by they. Hereby, you, Snake, are making my point for me. And whether or not you say, right, that I have the right to identify in a public sphere such as this as Ape, right, by my name, or in a non-binary fashion, right, in which you would call me they. You would not assume by the way my voice sounds or the way my avatar looks that I identify in a male or female capacity, right? We are cartoon characters with, shoot, what's that word? Anamorphic? No, that's not right. Anthropomorphic, right? Anthropomorphized screen handles, right? So these are Ape and Snake, right? You might say this, excuse me, just punching microphones over here. Ape and Snake are having a discourse right now, right? In third person. We wouldn't say he and her, or he and him, or she and, you get the picture, right? We're not gendering us if we don't know us. And it's not necessary to do so. And so that should be the main point to you here. Now, if I were to tell you, Snake, I prefer to go by he, or I prefer to go by they, right? What would you do? Would you go and say, well, that ape sounds like a man to me, so I will call them he? Or would you rather just continue to call me ape, or continue to just call me they or them? What makes sense? What's logical here? It's up to you. I mean, you can decide for yourself. I'm just not clear that you have, by your authoritative logic, given me the right to do so, right? Do I have the right to go by they, or go by she if I should so choose? And at what point is my request reasonable? And at what point you should say that I am a bad actor with insane and unreasonable expectations, right? Regardless of Addison and Ethan and good old Dr. Phil McGraw here, right? What should be the social norm? And is this going to totally destroy the function of gender altogether, right? If we just let it go on. I think I'll cut it short here, cut this to a part 2, because I have several more points to make, and I don't want to go on too much length. Still have to do some editing on this, so I'll drop this and try to finish it in the morning or tomorrow evening, so I can have them back to back Monday and Tuesday. So with that, I'll say thank you. Thank you to Snake Was Right for making this video, and I will be be emailing you a link to this content as it drops as well. And maybe we can be in touch to have a proper discussion about this, or whether or not we are at any significant points of disagreement here to be talked out. Thank you to subscribers, everyone past, present, future, and those who support, those who comment, and those who engage, those who have dealt with my ape shit, from time to time. It can get a little crazy around here, but such is the nature of life. Be well, be good to yourselves and to each other. Above all, stay trusty. Be true to you. I'll see you next time.